Um, all right, we should be live here at on Real Fridays here every Friday at 12:30 is Real Fridays with Rick Rock, Brock Cassidy, and Jeremy Potter. Um,
There it
and
is.
and this week we have a real special guest with Chris Breen from Blue Hour Housing. We're real excited to have him on our podcast, but we're excited. This is a good time where we talk about real industry housing issues, mortgage housing, and real estate from an insider's perspective. That's kind of raw, a bit unvarnished, not rehearsed whatsoever. Clearly, and but with sort of industry insight that is pretty rare and unique, given the legal expertise of Jeremy Potter, which is I think is one of the best in the country, and the real estate expertise and the fintech expertise you have from Brock and his successes that he's had with NewsZip, and then myself with just retail mortgage banking acquisitions and growth strategies. So excited! Glad we're all together. Welcome, Chris.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah, long-time listener, first-time caller. So,
Yeah, I don't think I gave I think purposely, like Rick said, Chris, I didn't give these guys a ton of background on Blue Hour, but I'm really excited for us to go a little outside the box of our normal guests here that are mostly at lenders, at real estate companies, at residential kind of traditional real estate companies. So I think you guys are really going to like this conversation, Jeremy and Rick. What Chris is doing, and I won't steal any of the thunder, but is some really cool conversions that cross between housing issues, financing issues, and really like real estate supply issues, which is something we talk about a lot, don't have a lot of solutions for usually. So yeah, Chris, thanks for coming on, and would love intro to Blue Hour first, and then maybe we can work back.
I was just going to say just a quick mic check. Is my audio any different from using this mic versus not? Does it sound any different than what it was before?
Sounds pretty good right now. Whether
mic check out of here, I was talking.
Got it.
It
well,
looks great.
yeah.
It also looks really official. So
Yeah, I know. Usually the ones come from up top, right? That's sort of the.
Yeah, can you get someone to hold that for you?
Pardon me?
Do you have one of your kids?
Exactly. Exactly. You got to have a bunch of kids for some reason. But so, Chris, tell us about yourself and tell us what you're doing. And it was on your website here at just a few moments ago. But tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, happy to jump in here. So I'm running Blue Hour Housing.
And let me ask you one other question before you get started.
Yeah.
If you move that door behind you, is that Is that decorative, or is it actually go somewhere in your house?
It's a functional door. Yeah, it's a functional door to a bathroom. So we want to open it up. But yeah, that's a functional barn door.
Got it. I was just trying to.
He's just a big barn guy. He's getting married in a barn in less than a month, and he's got barn doors all over the house. Yeah,
trying to get in theme.
Yeah, congratulations. That's great.
Thank you. Yeah, it's down to the wire here. So yeah, it's but yeah, happy to chat a little through Blue Hour. My background a little bit as well. Just I was at business school before this, so kind of started Blue Hour out of Wharton, and so since then I've been building Blue Hour. Super excited about it. We're really founded around 3 years ago, and we're fully focused on developing and managing workforce housing. And really that goes everything from like the sourcing of the housing, both the assets and employers, renovations, master leases, all the way through managing the properties. So really like a employee workforce housing developer. And our main focus has been partnering with employers actually to master lease properties for their employee housing. So it's a little bit of a different spin and kind of overlaps with workforce housing. We saw the need for workforce housing, as you all have seen, kind of this missing middle in the market. There's programs to fund, some of the lower income housing. And then, on the higher end, people can afford that housing, but there's a whole missing middle of housing that's been super challenging. So we partnered up with employers to help them offer housing as a solution. So we own this housing, and it helps them attract and retain talent and really takes them out of the housing business. There's a lot of employers out there that do own housing. There's some that don't own housing and want to be able to offer it. And it's all sorts of different businesses. And, we come in and then put all the tech solutions in and manage that housing for them. So most of our properties have been tied to a specific employer, but not all of our properties are. And we're really focused on just employer-driven demand employer markets with a lot of employer demand. And so that could be seasonal workforce or seasonal workforce or like longer term housing. And it could be international workforce, it could be domestic workforce. And so, we've had projects in Vermont, in Colorado, up in the mountains, Connecticut, Maine. We're working on one in South Carolina this fall. And really, we've been focused on adaptive reuse, where we just see a lot of opportunity to, um, you know, convert properties at just kind of a discount to replacement costs. And we think it's like a super sustainable approach to housing for just all these kind of aging structures. And on top of that, we've just seen some additional favorable zoning in a lot of these areas that's allowing for these conversions, increased density for workforce, and so it's been really really great building this so far. And we've have a long list of employers across the country we're working with that are looking for housing, and then a long list of properties that we think would be great to convert.
So who's a target? Who's a target customer of yours? So a large employer that just has like a high rate of relocation for its employees.
Like we partner with Vail in Killington up in the Vermont area for their workforce, both international workforce, kind of H-2B population that comes in and works seasonally in the U.S., and then also domestic workforce that is there and needs a place to live, and it's very expensive and hard to live in these kind of resort communities. To large global mining companies, or partner with Freeport-McMoRan out in Colorado for their mine workers to kind of attract them to the area, a place to land. They can stay there for as long as they want, but they often kind of move in, save up, and then will, maybe buy a house in the area. It lets them come and kind of build roots in an area. All the way through a project rooted up here in Kittery, which is focused kind of around the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, where you have all sorts of both contract workers and workers that want to live close to work, but they're having to drive an hour and a half because there's no like studio or one bedrooms in the area.
That's really fun.
Some of the early projects you guys were working on were like, things like out on an island, the people working at a resort can't afford to live there. And some of these like crazy niche supply problems. But we talk often on here, Chris. I know you've listened or been in the room with me when I've done some of these shows before, but we often talk about like how housing's not tracking to the demands of especially people like new to the workforce, or like millennials and Gen Z trying to figure out how to like blend work and life balance. So that's what, that's what I thought would make for an interesting show here is you guys, number one, you guys have some crazy projects you guys do, converting some really old housing stock into amazing places that can give a lot of people affordable places to live and work. But I also think it's just a cool time in the world to explore solutions like this, and where you guys go to the workforce, where you guys go to the companies first, and they know that they need 300 units of housing for this many months a year, gives you a cool, kind of like financing project as well for all our mortgage listeners.
Employers are putting, they're putting kind of, they're going out there and saying, hey, we need to solve this problem. We offer all sorts of benefits. We offer all these things, and we just have all this turnover. And there's a lot of challenges with that. And they want to be able to offer kind of this as an additional benefit as well in a lot of areas, or just to make the business even feasible, that the supply is just not even there, even if somebody could afford it. So, we've been kind of, with a lot of the hotel conversions as well, focused on, it's smaller living, but your choices are really like, do you want to live or have to find people to live with in like a home where maybe you take a bedroom, or you could have your own unit to yourself and maybe it's a smaller unit, but there's common spaces and you're also probably paying less than you'd pay in a traditional housing, setup if you were to get a 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom yourself. And so it's a great opportunity to be able to get into a market and maybe actually save some money.
Can you talk a little bit more detailed about that? Because obviously, Brock's right. We've identified workforce missing middle housing across rental ownership in almost every community. It's a real thing, as you know, and why you went into this work. One of the things that seems to be tough is what you said, which is how to operationalize these units in the way that the employer needs them or the community needs them at a lower cost, but they're not utilized 24/7, 365 necessarily. So how did you think about finding efficiencies or finding value and getting the cost down when it's hard to then monetize the asset at other times of the year. Or how are you
Yeah, for like a seasonal,
for a seasonal for like
yeah,
fail? Yeah,
yeah, for
killing.
a seasonal employer, it can be different. Sometimes we can partner two employers up together. So some markets are
Yep.
kind of dual seasonal, right? You have the summer season and winter season. That employer may not operate in both. And so if
Yep.
they own it themselves, they're forced to do it. Like up in Vermont, we have a lease that sits in the summer and a lease that sits in the winter. And so we can kind of get more usage. On top of it, we're also, because we're working with those employers, that employers have strong credit and they're able to kind of go in and put a long-term lease, which reduce risk for everyone. And the more you can reduce risk, the lower you can offer rents for. And so that's been another important piece of it, right? They can go in, and it's the same as like a global, restaurateur coming in and leasing a space. They're going to get a better deal than maybe somebody who's it's their first time doing it or something like that. And so they're utilizing that credit and their ability to kind of lease something for a long-term period and say, we're going to be paying these rent checks every month to basically allow for some of these projects to work as well. And so that's part of it for some of the seasonal. And then sometimes employers say they have to look and say, what's my cost of turnover? And what's the impact on my business of losing really good employees versus like covering some rent for part of the year? And a lot of times when they sit down and look at it, they say like, we'll cover rent to be able to keep great people around and to be able to offer this because there's so many other costs associated with the business.
Yeah, especially in hospitality and entertainment, you want that to reflect your brand. So let's talk then around like the full-time employer who's trying to make this a benefit. They're trying to recruit talent. What is their experience relative to filling these units? And what I mean is, are you also responsible for finding people, or are you strictly the real estate and then the employer finds the people?
Yeah. Luckily they handle their hiring. I think the hiring is oftentimes it's blocked by the lack of housing, right? And so what we do is we will oftentimes have on-site management at the properties. We think for a lot of these properties, it's the best way to manage them, to have somebody there who can be kind of high touch, especially for these employers. They don't want to be managing the housing. If they're in housing, it's probably because they have to be, or because there was, not people out there to help them. But we handle all the real estate property management pieces. So they can assign people, and they can be as involved as they want. So sometimes they have housing folks and they want to place people in rooms. Other times we're helping even farther back, from the start. And so we're managing everything, as it's an apartment building, but we also realize that like a lot of these individuals live together. So we're trying to make sure that it's like a great place where like you can build a little bit of a community as well. And so we really try to take as much as we can off their hands, but understand that also these are their employees. So we work with them really closely.
So if you and I partnered in Detroit and I wanted to move 200 people, I wanted to unlock 200 people in Detroit, and we identified a property, for instance,
Yeah.
and we were your partner, would we have the right of first refusal on the units, or would they be open market and our people would have an inside track by knowing about it from a marketing perspective, but it would also be anybody in the area that wanted an affordable rent?
Yeah, I mean, most of the properties we focused on so far, we actually go in with a partnership with employers and they take the whole property. So they
Got it.
are using the unit. They have access to the units. They fill them. They're generally fill up very quickly because there's a lot of demand. But if somebody moves out, like it's vacant for them, they can move someone in when they want to. And so they can offer it. So it's really their stock of housing.
So Jeremy would sign one master lease and fill all 200.
Exactly. Or we could, for a property, if it's that big or, maybe this specific opportunity, you could say, hey, we would want to secure 30 of the units.
Right.
And we'd say the other 170 will go out to the market for. And as long as we believe it works, then we'd move forward on it. And so there's different opportunities in different markets. We're flexible based on where we are.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
So maybe you already answered the question, but who buys the actual property itself? Are you guys the investor in the property? Are you co-investing with the employer?
Yeah, so we have an OpCo-PropCo structure. So Cloudland Capital is our kind of investor that brings in the capital for the deals, and so we we own the properties, and so we're the developers, Blue Hour, but they fund that purchase of the properties, and so the employer doesn't have to put up any money for these properties. So we own and operate them.
The employer just signs what, like a 10-year or however many year like master lease for the property, and then you guys go out and buy it.
Exactly, and we fund all the renovations. We'll furnish the rooms if they want the rooms to be furnished. We'll kind of, it's really based on we want to create a solution that works for them, and that looks a little bit different for every employer based on their needs.
So the one in Vail, like my brother actually works for Vail Resorts up in Stowe, where he's like their head of IT security or whatever, and he now he lives in Vermont, but he travels to Stowe, every day for his job, and so there's all kinds of condos and communities that are up there. So you might go in there and buy a handful of these condos that are already a part of the properties that are up at Stowe, and then, or would you look at older buildings that might be in disrepair, put capital in to sort of reinvigorate it, and then leverage that capital to get your return on the longer term leases with Vail and the surrounding resort?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's if you could buy a vacant apartment building, that would be awesome, right? They don't really exist in the U.S., right? There's not a lot of vacant housing, that you can go in. But
Jerry's got plenty in Detroit, so
we're going to talk about Detroit.
Often the intersection of resort communities, and especially for those communities, and vacant housing is zero. So we've really tried to focus on kind of that adaptive reuse of properties. So up in Stowe, fortunately and unfortunately, a lot of the properties, even the older motels, have been renovated and are charging a lot of money per night now. So we try to go and find off-market properties or look for properties in different markets that we believe would be good candidates for conversion. Take that risk on the conversion, understanding we're going to go work with maybe Vail up there to lease them that property for their employee housing.
Yeah.
And so that's, we'll look at all different types of properties, to do that. And then we haven't specifically done, ground up yet, but is another, as we can continue to see the cost of, some of the modular type housing and other, opportunities come down. We'd love, we've been actively exploring opportunities to do some ground up construction specifically tailored for these use cases, right? And
you guys get some really creative. Well, you guys have to get really creative on some of these, right? Where it's like the company says, I want to lease 300 units, and you can find maybe an 80 unit motel to do something with, and maybe a couple, 10 unit apartments or 5 unit apartments or something. But you have sometimes like these gaps to fill. So you have to do a lot of different things on some of these. I think you were telling me you're buying single family houses to fill in the rest of the quota of how much they want to lease.
We're down in Connecticut, we're working with an employer there, and there's all sorts of kind of dilapidated housing or housing that's kind of, not up to code. And so we're going and buying those and renovating them. But that's a mix of multi and single family. And so we're building a portfolio of like smaller assets that then can be all leased to an employer and then kind of all tied together through like a tech solution where they can like actually manage it. And so we have a little bit of that in those markets, but you're probably not going to be buying a lot of multifamily or single family or anything like that up in Stowe, because it's just obviously it's priced as if it's a vacation home.
Yeah, your ideal state is like finding like the little bit older, a little bit worse shape motel or apartment building or something that you guys can get dialed up pretty quickly and deliver on that. But some of them are harder than others.
Yeah, and I'm sure you guys have seen a lot of this is just the dense. So there's been a lot of restrictive zoning over the years. And so, but more and more we're seeing like more favorable density for projects like this. And so, a hotel, as an example here in Kittery, Maine, where you would only have density for maybe 15 units an acre. If you limit some of it to 80% of AMI, which is workforce, you now get 40 units an acre. So now it allows you to convert that hotel, whereas before you wouldn't be able to convert it because the density would be too high. So that's one of the major things we run into is just density restrictions.
Well, yeah. Also, that's going to be the tension or the fun part of ground up versus renovation, right? So once you start looking at ground up, it's like, where's the land and what are you allowed to do on the land?
Yeah.
When you at least coming into a motel or an existing structure, you at least have something there that
Yeah.
you can start with from the land use perspective, if not.
Yeah.
One of the things that comes to mind, one of the things I've been struggling with a lot in this space is complexity. Investors, business partners, regulators, politicians really struggle with how complex your business is, the type of development you're trying to do ends up being. How did you think about that going into it, from the work you did in business school, from like starting the company, understanding that you've described, just in my hearing of it, you're kind of an expert in like 3 different businesses at the same time, which is complex. How do you manage all that?
Yeah, I mean, we gotta find good people first, right? And so obviously hiring a good team is the number one most important thing. But we haven't we for the most part, I guess I would say, stayed away from some of the government programs so far, just given kind of the really long time frames and some of the complexity that goes along with just everything from the reporting structures to, like, just as I said, the length of time and application processes and all these and the requirements you have to have. So those are great programs, but they're very, very complex. And so we found that also partnering with employers helps us kind of like, that's a whole business in of itself, is building those relationships and helping them understand what we're doing and that we're out here. So we kind of break in that piece, but then we also hire, folks that are good at construction and good at development and then good at property management. And you kind of, piece all these pieces together and then, move through the process. But yeah, I mean, it's pairing all of it together, especially when you bring an employer in, is challenging, because now you're not just trying to like do a, do a development project. You're also now trying to work and negotiate with an employer to make sure it works for them. So it has to work for us then, which is kind of like the dual piece of it, on top of the zoning, which is generally one of the most challenging parts of the process, is the rezonings for long-term use. So, we've taken all that.
Generally your workflow, I think, is to find the hungry company first, right? That has the demand. You're doing like demand side first, and
Yeah.
then, I mean, I'm sure you guys. I think you guys are willing to be creative of like, this is the exact right property for our use case, and maybe then go find an employer. But usually, you have your parent company and existing partners for financing relatively set up, and then you go source the company, and then is the longest leg then finding the housing, the navigating the local government, like
Yeah.
all,
The
yeah.
local politics is one of the biggest challenges here, right? It's your, no matter what you're doing, there's always huge challenges to it. You're trying to convert, even in places with completely rundown properties, and you're trying to turn it into housing. And there's just so many challenges when it comes to the zoning piece of it. And so even once you get through that zoning, because it's a change of use, the property requires so many upgrades, right? From a building code perspective. So you can't just take a hotel and just say it's housing now, like it's, when you convert it, there's sprinklers and fire alarm systems and all sorts of, AD accessibility. There's all sorts of pieces that you have to kind of redo on these properties to bring them up to code. And so it's, the complexity, there's a lot of complexity, but the other good thing is that technology's come a long way. Like just how we track things, even with just like our database that we use to track things, our property management tools, our accounting tools. Like I don't, this would have been, it's hard to think about the number of tools we use that didn't exist 5 years ago.
So Chris, go back, rewind a little bit. So you've done this for about 2 years, 2.5 years. It seems like you guys have really generated a tremendous amount of traction in a short period of time in pretty like eclectic markets. Like it's not like Vermont would not have been my first go-to play, right? I'm from Vermont. Like I'm glad that you did, but
Yeah.
but I also feel like it sounds to me that you've generated a tremendous amount of traction in a short period of time. Did you start with the fund with the idea to say, hey, let's get $150 million or so in pledge to capital for renovations or to purchase these properties with a business model around recouping those deployed with assets that are deployed to actually for the renovations, and how that money is going to be, sort of reimbursed or paid back through some kind of line of capital, or how's that done?
Yeah. We so Cloudland has some other operating companies that they invest into, and they were working in Vermont on. They have another platform called Meadow Homes that is a more vacation rental platform, and so they were familiar with Vail from up in the area, and they had kind of were also looking for housing. They continued to see just the challenges of staffing up in that market. Vermont is just such a unique market, but the staffing became so hard, and so then we decided to partner up with Vail and then Killington up there to say, hey, like you guys have this problem. We need to find a housing solution that would work for you up there. So that allowed us to then go identify and target different properties up there that would work for them, because like the 4-bedroom large vacation rental is probably not going to work unless you want to put way too many people per room. So you have to find properties that work well, that have, the right bedroom counts and have the right layouts. We bought an inn up there because that was, it's a sprinkler property that has the right setup with large communal kitchens for folks to live in, and that's for kind of seasonal workforce. So a little bit came out of that realization. And then over time we said, okay, now we're going to go build this across the country. And to be honest, we go where we find employers that understand the challenge and want to partner. And we go where we think that there's places where the community cares about this and wants to make a change, because it's hard enough to get the projects to work already. If an employer doesn't understand, or if a local community doesn't want it to happen, you don't need to fight every single battle. It's needed everywhere in the U.S. So like find the areas where we think that we can make it happen. And so yeah, we have and then I guess on your question on the capital, yeah, the capital part of it is not having to raise deal by deal, because we have a thesis and we're investing into that, and we understand it's a problem, and so we're able to kind of we direct the capital into these deals because we're agreed upon on the thesis, and Cloudland is also an owner in Blue Hour in the operating company.
I love it. No, that's incredible. Well, more millionaires have come out of Wharton School than I think it's number 3 on the list. So I think you're a good guy to invest in because of your pedigree, and number 2, I think that I mean I love it from a renovation and reconstruction standpoint. It definitely fits a short-term need. It doesn't necessarily fit a lender's middle to longer term need with respect to getting them into a home that they own where they build equity and that sort of thing. But it definitely addresses a short-term housing crisis for young professionals right out of school who are making 60, 70, 80 grand a year, maybe even 100 grand a year, but they can't afford to buy and they can barely afford to rent. So especially in these sparser markets. So I think it definitely fits the need. And I think there's a broad global opportunity for large workforces, especially that are interim, that do seasonally or shift people around, the country. I started right at a college in Mountain View, Northern California. And I lived in an apartment that was just a Cedars. It was an apartment community called Cedars in Mountain View that it was a semiconductor company. And I lived in it for like 16, 18 months. And they just put me in there, lived in it. They moved me to Korea for 6 months, came back. I went back to my apartment. And it was kind of, so a lot of these transient sort of have overseas contracts where you're going back and forth. I think this is it fits a critical need.
Yeah. And we've focused on the employer, kind of master leases, but also, as I mentioned, like here in Kittery, we don't have like a specific master lease on the property, but we know there's so much demand in the area. And I do think it's a great place where, whether you're out of college or not, it could be any age range. You can move in somewhere, have your own space, have a huge amount of communal areas at that property, and then actually be able to save up to then go afford and buy that home or an apartment or whatever you may be able to afford at that point. But there's just not a lot of that. And people are spending huge amount of times just driving back and forth to work all the time, which is it's just a huge challenge, especially when you're in these markets where traffic can be crazy or the weather condition can be terrible. So it's been kind of boiling up for a long time, this workforce housing and employee housing need. And,
I think, I didn't know that story about Rick. So you drew out a new story from Rick. That's but but I think Jeremy and I have both, at least I believe we've both lived in workforce housing of some kind before. I did at Rocket for a while. Jeremy, if you haven't, I know you've considered it a few times for different companies you were working for.
Yeah. I did the 3-month version because
Yeah.
my job started before my family could get to Detroit. So I moved out here, and then 3 months later, my family moved, and by then we had an apartment in Detroit. But yeah, so like that's a good example of just that corporate sort of corporate style.
Yeah, there's definitely like, I feel like corporate housing's been like an area that's been focused on for a long time, and so we've tried to kind of pair that up with a bit like the longer term, like, hey, you could actually be here for more than like 3 or 6 months, and we're trying, corporate housing is typically even more expensive than a normal apartment, so we're trying to be on the other side where we're not like
doing it.
Well, it depends who's paying the bill, right? If the company's paying the bill entirely or something like that, or off of a stipend, then it does change things. I mean, I had an interesting story about how things like used to be, where talking to somebody who was in auto finance and was moved around the country throughout their career. Every time you wanted a promotion or you wanted to get ahead at the company, you went to where they sent you. We're talking like 60s, 70s, 80s, right?
Yeah.
And this individual was like pretty high up. I think it ended up being GMAC financing at the end of the day, but throughout his whole career. And he had the like relocation package from corporate America, 60s, 70s. He had owned like 24 houses in his life. Because every 18 months to 2 years, he would buy a house and move, and buy a house and move again, and buy a house and move again. He's like, I've never done the math on fees and commissions that I personally am responsible for. He's like, but it's a lot. And that used to be sort of the way. And now, like, one of the reasons we have a constriction in workforce affordable mid-market housing, lowercase a affordable, attainable housing, is just the economics of the economy right now, the economics of corporate America, the economics of these companies. It's like, this is not a political statement at all, but like the value flows different places. It doesn't flow to the workforce to keep incomes at pace with everything else. It flows to shareholders. It flows to, what do you own? How do you own things? And so we have this like pinch. And so I am kind of curious, like, what your response in your research and in your building this company would be to the thought process of just like, we keep hanging more and more of our lives on our employers. They are responsible for our retirement. They are responsible for our healthcare. They are responsible in some cases for aspects of education. And now we're going to make them responsible for housing as well. Like, can corporates continue to take on more and more of this responsibility for us? And how's that been talking to corporates? What's that like?
I mean, we definitely hear this, and there's sometimes concerns over, oh, what if my employer controls my housing? And it is, it's certainly a challenge. I mean, I think there's a bunch of different ways to look at it, but if you look at like our properties out west, like, there's a lot of people that were working for that company that are living in like dilapidated motel rooms or their cars or other places. So like, our view in general is like, we are providing better, safer, cleaner housing for people. Obviously the company's providing it, but in my view, it's also a little bit of way for it to trickle down in some ways, where they do subsidize the housing, right? There is a piece that is then coming back to the employee. They're getting often under market pricing for this housing. And so I think that it's like a little bit of way to offer it a subsidy. Yes, do they have then control of the housing? Of course. But it does allow you to, to maybe take a role or to be somewhere that you wouldn't be able to go to if they didn't offer it. And so
I think
it's
that's
kind of like a little bit of both sides of the coin. It's like kind of hard, should the corporations control all the housing? Probably not in general, all the housing, but also like, has it allowed people to also be able to like live in a place they wouldn't be able to necessarily live if in the absence of that, because the markets are being driven up by other forces as well? Yes. So
it's probably like one leg of like a multi-leg strategy to like also having corporate programs to help with first-time home buyers and things like that I know we've played with a little bit, Jeremy, at our time at Rocket and on the show, just talking about it and elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, dude, my opinion is all new housing units are good. Meaning we just need new housing units in every community. So like net,
especially when there's jobs for them. Yeah.
And then on top of everything, there's also a job. Yeah.
I mean, look, like out in Leadville, the project we did, we brought 56 new units to a small, like Leadville's not a big place. That's 56 units that would have been taken up by that employer anyways throughout town. So now we're bringing new supply on, which opened 56 units in Leadville for other people in the community as well. So it's like, it's another way for an employer also to kind of contribute to a community. And we see another way. Deer Valley's building a ton of housing. They're required to build employee housing. Like communities are starting to require it because they're like, pencil, this is part of your development project. And then, or, figure out how to offer it, but you need to be able to offer it. So
yeah,
sorry, I interrupted you there.
I love that. That's great. Yeah. I mean, the other question I had was kind of around that. I'll ask both parts. You can take it wherever you want. But it seems like politicians love announcing new jobs in the community, right? Like it's one of the things that politicians should and love to do. We're bringing jobs to our area. And then also on top of that, the media, politicians love to assume that renovating a building into housing is easier than it is, right? You must have run into this your whole career, which is like they look at an office building, they look at a church, they look at a school, and they go, make it housing for me. You must be able to do that. Yeah. So with those two very positive, very optimistic things on the political class, like at that level, right? How is it not easier, I guess is my question. Not the tactical part. We know that renovating a building is bonkers hard from what you're saying. But I'm asking, like, are you seeing a political climate? Are you seeing partnerships between the local politicians and the corporates that are unlocking buildings or land for you? Because you'd think this is like the two things they like talking about, new jobs and new houses. So like, why aren't you?
I think a lot of, depending on the area, a lot of large businesses have like, I would say like a love-hate relationship with the areas that they're in, but there's like a push and pull, right? They help support those communities in a lot of ways because the tax dollars and the donation, and they bring, all the employees there. At the same time, they wield a lot of power and they also can afford to do what they want to do. And so there's just always like, there's half the community that I would say in general, like loves the corporation and some of the smaller communities. And then there's half that's like, doesn't view them so serious. So there's always like this, for any person who's super excited about 10,000 new jobs in an area, there's a lot of people that are not excited about 10,000 new jobs in an area because that means that
traffic or infrastructure,
it's not how it used to be. There's a lot of different things. And like, there's very valid concerns in part of it, but there's also like, you have to have some of these things in order to kind of continue the viability of areas throughout the country. And so it's always that balance. And so I think, you see all the positive spins on it, but then you sit in a zoning meeting and you see what happens at a zoning meeting. And that is, the entire community gets to speak. And there are people that no matter what, no matter how much they may believe in a project, they don't want it to change. And you're always going to have that in different areas. And so that's the politics of it, because at the end of the day, it gets voted on by the 5 or 7 people that control that board. And so if those people are in favor of it, you can move stuff on. And if they're not, then you can't. And so that's what I was kind of saying. We often check in really early on in a process, like, is this worth even thinking about, right? Is it worth, trying to push along here? Because if a community doesn't want it, it's not going to happen. Even if they got 10,000 new jobs, if they don't want higher density of housing or any redevelopments or anything, and they only want single family homes in a specific area, like you just have to, they'll block it.
Yeah. Well, that's why I asked. We're trying to keep a close tab, at least in my housing policy work. I'm trying to keep a close tab on, NIMBY versus YIMBY. But
there's a YIMBYism group out there now. That across the country, right?
Yeah. And, there's a couple of different voices nationally on it that I think of. up for growth and others. But one of the things that does seem to be shifting is the ability for a handful of NIMBYs at a zoning meeting to be persuasive over the 5 to 7 council members. Like
Yeah. Because
it's
who shows up? The people that show up are not the people that are giving, right? So this is the challenge.
right.
Everyone who doesn't want it shows up.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's hard to get people who either are fine with it or even optimistic about it to come and show up and say that. Right. And so
when you're hour 4 of a zoning meeting in like a dark room somewhere in wherever that's like, in a town council office, it's hard to convince somebody to come like be in favor of your project, even if they are, to sit through the 3 other things on the agenda, the whatever on a Wednesday night. And some of these zoning meetings are middle of the day, people are working, right? So it's getting people to come out is always a challenge. So yeah, I mean, we've actually been, I was looking the other day at kind of some of those YIMBY groups, because I think there are people out there that want to be supportive, but people are also can be afraid as well of like publicly showing support as well. There's just a lot of.
I just can speak only for Detroit on this because I didn't start getting into this stuff until I was already here. But I think one of the things that I worried about on behalf of residents of Detroit is showing up in favor of housing only to be hoodwinked by a less than straightforward developer. Like you are a straightforward developer. You're obviously laying out the plan and you have corporate partnerships, which anytime you have that, they have their reputation on the line and things like that. But I think often real estate developers come to a planning meeting and then what ends up in the ground at the ribbon cutting is very different than what was described at the meeting where it was approved. And so like that is something I'm aware of. That's why I asked about complexity earlier, because I'm not naive to that. Yeah. At the same time, it is truly a crisis, to your point earlier. I mean, you led with it. It is really a crisis. If you can't afford a stable home, a lot of other things in your life fall apart. Yeah. Honestly, housing stability is very critical to safety and stability and economic activity in a community. And so it is a very complex issue for sure.
Yeah, it's it's unfortunately you end up paying for it if you're the next developer that walks in the room after one of those projects ribbon cuts. And we've had that in areas where you come in and we're like, what? There's a lot of pushback here. It's seemingly like this is a project that makes sense. We're and then like, oh well, we got burned on the last one, and so we're being very, and so we do everything we can to put protections around that to make sure that what we promise is what a community ends up getting. But that's, we have a reputation such as we go around the country to try to find areas that are in support of the housing. That being said as well, we've tried to work on properties and projects that, we are not buying a luxury waterfront hotel, right? We are finding properties that we believe are underperforming or have become eyesores or become problems, and we're reinvesting in those properties. And frankly, your only other option may be to demolish them, right? And then sell the land and do another development project. And so, we were able to, that's the advantage of kind of some of the adaptive reuses. There's the positive benefit of being able to kind of reuse current structures, reinvest in areas, not have to scrape something and throw it all away. And, we use that, it's beneficial kind of from a zoning perspective for some of the things you can do with those properties.
Excellent. Well,
I know Detroit has no shortage of of properties for adaptive reuse.
Yeah, we have actually a school next door to my daughter's elementary school, and there's a bunch of us in the neighborhood who have been wondering what we could do with it from a housing perspective in particular. But it's everywhere in Detroit. I mean, I actually think the hardest part in Detroit would be the employer part. We're still lagging behind in recruiting jobs and recruiting employers here. There's a significant demand. We have a hospital system called Henry Ford Health Systems here who's building their own apartment building, to your point, your point, next door to the facility, because nurses need a place that they can feel safe and work. And so the hospital took it upon themselves. And I think I'm sure there's a developer behind it. I'm sure I should know more, but it's exactly what you mean. And I think I joke about Detroit being what's next simply because I think this crisis has put a generation of people in a position where they will consider parts of the country that they've never considered before because it offers a quality of life they can't have elsewhere. So my argument has always been that the upper Midwest is what's next, simply because if you want to own a home or live somewhere you can save enough to own a home,
Yeah.
you got to start somewhere where it makes sense. And
Yeah.
you're buildings in everywhere.
We see similar things in Norwich, Connecticut. We're working right now, and it's a very similar area in the sense like
yeah,
large textile mill, historic. It's been sitting vacant for. There's all sorts of structures, beautiful structures, like really, really, really cool historic properties that have been sitting vacant, and like you can't build that now, or like that. Like you can't just create that in the middle of nowhere. So like all these cool historic places that have been converting. You've seen it in place in Connecticut. Brock has seen it up. I mean, up in Maine in Biddeford. Biddeford was completely revitalized because of like a mill transformation, right?
Yeah.
And so, finding areas like that where you can still afford things, but also have like a really cool history and like are well set up if the employers come. But as you mentioned, a lot of some of these places, there's no even class B or A, like A housing. Like if you want to move there, you can't find a place that maybe there's just a shortage of that because everything's kind of like ticked down over the years because they haven't been maintained.
Absolutely. I mean, that corner of New England too is always fascinating to me. I won't take us on a total tangent. Because you hop on the train and you're 75 minutes from New York and 90 minutes from Boston. It's like,
and you're 15 minutes from the ocean. And you're on a river there too. It's like, there's just so many of these pockets where you're like why is New London's obviously has all this money coming in, but it's like you're on the water in Connecticut in between two major cities. Like it makes no sense for it not to be like an area that's developing, right? And now it is.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, man. It is so good to meet you. I'm really glad we had this conversation. Keep up the great work. I hope we can stay in touch because I want to talk to you more about how we should think about Detroit. But this is
you guys will have to connect on some modular housing topics too. I've been digging into that for years. And
Chris, I worked with a philanthropic fund here in Detroit called the Gilbert Family Foundation, and we wanted to showcase what modular factory built housing looks like from a single family perspective and duplexes. And so we were able to put so far 7 with a couple more to come in a neighborhood where we could kind of show, like, if you want a house with pretty significant discounts, I think more to come. But if you want to construct a single family house in Detroit for 30% cheaper than stick built, like we're getting started. So I think
the development's been super cool. We're always on the lookout for great modular builders that like can kind of, because historically it's felt like the advantage was really speed in markets where labor was expensive, but now it seems more and more it's like, all right, it's that plus the actual cost to build is going down. And I think, regulations are making it a bit easier and stuff like that. And so, I would love to connect more on that. We're, always looking for more modular housing experts.
I'll definitely follow up. This is going to be great to talk to you. And I really appreciate your time. I know how valuable it is. This has been great.
Yeah, no, it's great chatting and great to be on here.
Same here. All right. Good to talk to you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Brock.
See you guys.
See ya.